Hello, and welcome to Everything Fear. This podcast is dedicated to all things horror, so please sit down, get comfortable, and be scared. Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of Everything Fear with me, Kit Tinsley. Coming up this week, we have an interview with screenwriter Tom Jolliffe, a short story from author Don Smith, music from Motel Transylvania, and a review of a movie called President's Day, as well as all of our usual features, spooky news, horror movie news, and true horror. First up, spooky news. Our first story this week comes from the Lake Weber area in Queensland, Australia. Talk of spooky events in the Lake Weber area have sparked supernatural debate on social media after a walker asked if anyone had noticed anything strange at the Peregian end of Noosa National Park. The walker said, "I was walking there today and I heard a weird humming sound, like a human humming a tune. It followed me for 30 minutes. It sounded like it was getting closer too, before I left the fire track." This led to a lot of people commenting that they had experienced similar encounters while walking around the lake. Sounds of people following you and humming seem to be common, as are strange lights in the sky. Tim Bull, widely known as Tim the Yowie Man, is the Australian National Museum's resident cryptonaturalist, a term he invented, meaning someone who studies rare, strange and hidden phenomena in the natural world. He said that these sort of lights are common in the Australian outback. They're known as min-min lights. Bull said, "Min-min lights are best described as strange balls of light seen bouncing around, coming and going, usually white but sometimes other colours. No matter how close you get to the light, you try to chase it and reach it, it always seems to be too far away." He said that the humming noises may be coming from the ocean. There is a phenomenon that scientists can't explain in various spots all around the world, like a human humming or someone off in the distance. Bull said the constant action of waves, even a couple of kilometres away, can cause low-frequency earth tremor. Next we have a story about a ghost exercising in a park in India. The story centres around a video that shows a shoulder press machine moving on its own in the park, while a bunch of policemen stand around watching it and filming. Former cricketer Akash Chopra shared the video on Twitter. The video has been viewed over 160,000 times and has been retweeted over 1,000 times. So, is there a buff ghost haunting a park in India and putting many of us to shame for not exercising enough? Sadly not. Fact-checking site, The Logical Indian, investigated the story and found that the police were there to investigate reports of haunted gym equipment, but that they had already discovered before the video was taken that it was in fact moving due to the machine being over-greased. Finally this week, we have the story that former Liverpool, Tottenham and West Ham defender Neil Razor Ruddock once hired the late celebrity medium Gerikakura to rid his home of a pervy ghost that was spying on his wife. Ruddock claimed that the ghost, the spirit of a dead soldier who was shot down in 1940 during the Battle of Britain, once even whispered in his ear. Razor and wife Leah Newman decided an exorcism was needed after she felt a presence in her bedroom every time she was undressing. And they were left terrified when wooden ornaments flew off the walls and rocking chairs swung into action on their own. Razor called in TV psychic and ghost hunter Derek before his death in January from sepsis. He said Derek banished the ghoul by yelling at it and revealed that it was the spirit of a dead soldier shot down in 1940 during the Battle of Britain, which was fought in the skies of Kent over Razor's home. And now we have the first part of our interview with screenwriter Tom Jolliffe. And now we're joined by screenwriter Tom Jolliffe. How are you, Tom?
I'm very well, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, not a problem. I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. When did you start writing?
I would say it was probably about sort of 10, 15 years ago that I really started getting into screenwriting.
Yeah.
And then, at first it starts off as a little hobby. And then you start thinking, well, it would be nice if, well, at first you start getting grand ideas and thinking it would be nice if I sold $1 million script.
Yeah.
Then you start thinking, pulling your ambitions back a little bit and thinking, well, it would be nice if someone just made it. So yeah, I'd been writing for a little while, had a few near misses, a few films that had been picked up, and then, things out of my control, like companies not getting funding and things like that. It's
always the way.
Yeah. So in the end, my first short film I produced myself with a friend of mine. So that really got the ball rolling. And then, once you start progressively filling up your CV, you tend to find that you get a little bit progressively more busy. So yeah, like anything really. I mean, if it seems like you've got experience, then people are more likely to come back to you, or you'll get recommended by someone, and then things sort of kick on from there.
Yeah. Who are your biggest influences as a writer?
I would say, I think there's quite a lot. I think I'm just generally influenced a lot by, I'd say, quite psychological horrors. So, guys like Polanski, Kubrick. And also, I just like a lot of their work from the sort of 70s in American cinema in general.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, it's like guys like Robert Towne. Something like Chinatown really inspires me as a writer.
Yeah, can understand that.
Yeah, and there's a few, and I like sort of quirky and unique films as well. So With Nell and I is another one that really inspires me.
Yeah,
it's so kind of individual that it's the kind of thing that I want to do. But then if you focus too much on trying to recreate it, it can be difficult because it's like trying to capture someone else's magic. So
yeah, it's finding your own magic, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think, anything that really inspires you is a good thing, because you can take nuggets and then put it into your own work. Yeah.
Now, you work in the horror genre, but you also work in the action genre and drama. But what is it attracts you to horror as a writer?
I think... So initially, horror wasn't really something that I had an ambition to get into particularly.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always liked horror films, and I think I've just progressively since I've started writing them, I've had a bit more of an appreciation. And then, looking back on a few of the horror films, I think it's a genre that's underrated.
Definitely,
yeah. It sort of I think for the artistic merits as well, more than anything, it's not really that appreciated. If you look at guys like John Carpenter, he was never held in the same sort of esteem as, certain other directors.
Yeah.
Despite the fact you look at, stuff like Halloween and The Thing and how well made they are.
Yeah, they're so groundbreaking. The era he came out, he really should have been up there with like Spielberg and Scorsese, but because it was horror.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and horror allows you to you can sort of go deeper into someone's psyche in terms of characters, and on a visual standpoint as well. You've got that ability to just have a heightened reality, or have something that looks like it doesn't make logical sense, but within that film itself, you can push the boundaries a little bit more. I find.
Yeah.
If you think of something like Suspiria, and how colourful that film is.
Yeah.
It doesn't look real, but because it's a horror film, and it's this kind of almost fantasy, it really works for the film.
Yeah, definitely.
Sort of its own little world.
Definitely.
So I mean that's a thing I like. And initially I got into horror more from, I think it was a standpoint of horror films can be written quite low budget, because generally in the market, you can make action films, but they tend to require a bigger name to sell them.
Yeah.
Whereas horror can sell more on the concept, so you can do something quite low budget, and it became almost a necessity just to sort of get in.
Yeah, I completely understand that.
Yeah, and I did one, and it sort of snowballed, and then you do a few more.
Yeah, I mean, as a horror writer myself, I always feel that the beauty of the horror genre is you can sort of hold a mirror up to society in a safe way where people don't necessarily realise you're doing it, and it can be sort of satirical or allegorical without rubbing people's faces in big issues. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I think there's a lot of skill to doing. Horror's got a little reputation for being a bit cheesy in some places.
Yeah,
and people love that as well, which is good. But some of them are quite intense and quite deep, and I don't think it ever gets as much appreciation as it should as a genre.
Yeah, definitely. I watched your film that you wrote, Scarecrow's Revenge, the other night. I believe that was your first feature, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was my first feature.
Where did the idea for that come from?
Basically, I'd been talking to the producers about another film, because initially I responded to, they'd put a call out for writers.
Yeah.
And I'd pitched a few ideas, which they liked. But then they came back to me and said, we've got a couple of ideas, one of which was basically just, scarecrows versus Vikings. So I thought, yeah, that sounds like quite a nice concept. So that's basically what it started from. And this sort of comes from like the distributors. So
yeah,
they have a lot, at the time they had a sort of run on Scarecrow films. And then I was asked to write this one, Scarecrow's Revenge.
It was sort of a commission type.
Yeah. So pretty much all my horror films so far have been commissions.
Yeah.
And they tend to be based on what, the distributors and the producers think is going to sell at the time. So there's things that it's, recognizable concepts like witches, Vikings, scarecrows. Yeah, and the Tooth Fairy is another one as well that I've got.
Yeah, I saw the trailer for that.
Yeah, so it's all good fun.
Yeah.
As much as I can, I try and inject a little bit more beyond what the genre expectations are.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Scarecrow's Revenge has some flaws, obviously due to budget constraints, really, especially as it's a period piece on a low budget. But there is a solid story there that is a bit more in depth than you expect from a film of that sort of budget.
Yeah, I think I just tried to add a few elements in there. I mean, the whole thing, there's an element with a witch in there, which I just decided to put in as well, just to add a little bit more to it. I think, yeah, it was made more just to, be a little bit fun. But I just like those, because I generally, as well as sort of like stuff like The Shining and things like that, I love just sort of, cheesy horror as well. So,
Definitely.
creature features and things like that. So I really enjoyed writing it.
Well, that's what it's all about, really, isn't it? And I think, if you have fun writing it, then people are going to pick up on that.
Yeah. I think, it's fun. It was interesting as my first one to be writing with sort of very low budget in mind as well.
Yeah.
Because you'll do a draft and they'll say, oh, we can't have that because we haven't got enough money to put that in or whatever. And there was supposed to be, I had a choice at the beginning between having a Viking village in there as a location, or a castle.
Right.
And then a little bit later they said, okay, you can have the Viking village and we'll be able to get the castle exterior as well. So there was a shot toward the end, which I won't spoil too much, but they were supposed to be heading towards a castle.
Yeah.
Well, in the end, we couldn't get the castle location, so it's difficult really, because you envision something and then come the final thing, it's not there.
Yeah.
But in the end, I'm just quite happy to see my stuff coming out on screen.
That's right. I mean, I suppose especially with a commission piece, you're sort of aware of the budget in advance. So because obviously when I've written screenplays and I've written novels, and obviously with a novel you can just go whoo, imagination takes you wherever you want. But obviously with the screenplay I wrote, I knew I had to think of budget constraints, and it is difficult, but you have to make do with what you've got, really, don't you?
Yeah, and I think I enjoy that in a sense as well, because it's quite challenging.
Yeah,
and it tends to make you, shift your focus a little bit more onto character as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you don't always get your sort of your own way. Like the film, I probably would have injected a bit more humor, but that's not something that is, popular with audiences, or at least, what the people who are green lighting it think is popular.
Yeah.
So, you have to sort of, to an extent, do as you're told, and then do the best you can within those constraints.
That's right. Now, the short film, The Dark Recess, I watched that as well recently. And that's sort of supernatural tinged exploration of guilt, really.
Yeah.
Where did that idea come from?
Initially, the idea, it's sort of going to lean into a different direction slightly, because so this the lead character, she sort of stumbles onto a old analog signal on an old radio.
Yeah.
And starts getting hearing things from this sort of like guru. So the initial idea was going to be to have it more of a visual thing, so he would be like a YouTuber kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we decided that actually kind of doing something quite old school would be more interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, the initial idea came after watching Videodrome, which is one of the elements I quite liked, because he got characters in that. And, the lead character, James Woods, in that film, he's sort of struggling with his mind a little bit to distinguish reality and fantasy. And he's sort of hearing things from, these different people, these different sort of, voices that are coming to him.
Yeah.
So that's really kind of where it spawned from. We were kind of inspired by, films like Cronenberg films, stuff like The Shining. Yeah, it's just something psychological and a little bit interesting, more kind of a mystery than sort of outright horror.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really well shot as well, that film, I have to say. Yeah,
I have to give my brother credit for that. He does, so he shoots, edits, does all the grading, sound design. So he tends to do those technical things. And then I do the writing, sort out a lot of the logistics, and I did the score as well, along with someone else, Rachel Shuttleworth, who helped me out on the score for that. So it was just another thing. We just wanted to do something which I like. You know, we didn't have any money to do it, but we just, you know, made the best we could for no money. And, you know, got a few collaborators in to help us. And I think, you know, there's a certain freedom to that because you can kind of do what you want.
I think that's right. And I think that going for that slightly more mysterious psychological thing is a better choice for low budget, because you don't have to rely on special effects. You know, it's story and camera work and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, you know, even if you've got, you know, no money to shoot with, or you've got like a, you know, reasonable camera, you have to make the best of it. And I think, you know, if you do make the best of it and you put some effort in, you know, you can get some good results. And we were quite happy with, we had quite a good festival run for the film. So in the end, it was, you know, worth doing.
Yeah.
And, you know, we just enjoyed, you know, the process of making it, and then, you know, just seeing a few rewards for it. And now, you know, we got it out on Amazon as well, which is good.
Yeah, definitely. I produced a film and we got that on Amazon. That was great. So
yeah, it's good. It's nice to have it, you know, there's a, you know, a place to put it. And I think, you know, you're never going to make millions of pounds on doing it, but you know, it's a platform which has a name. And, you know, people don't necessarily have to be looking exactly for it to find it because of the algorithms or, you know, something that might be similar. Then, you know, they'll see your artwork up there and might be drawn to it.
That's right.
So, yeah, it's quite a good way to sort of capture an audience. Whereas I think, on YouTube, I think things can get a little bit more lost if you just put it direct onto YouTube.
Yeah. There's just so much on there, isn't there? That's, I mean, what is it? Several million videos a day, isn't it?
Yeah, it must be, yeah. And I think, you know, there's so many different sort of themes and things on YouTube. And, you know, you've got the music, you've got the kind of informational videos and influencers, whereas Amazon is more focused on sort of film, really, which is good. So
yeah, it's nice to have that platform, really.
Yeah.
You know, not like the old days when it was very hard to get anyone to see your film unless you could afford to distribute it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you had to sort of go off copying your own videos and things like that.
Selling them at car boot sales. Now, looking at your IMDb page, you've got an awful lot of projects coming up. Can you tell us about some of those?
Yeah. So I've got a few more horror films coming out soon. Next month in the UK, I think 15th it is The Return of the Tooth Fairy is coming out.
Yeah.
Which is a sequel to a film I didn't write. But again, that was an interesting challenge to sort of do a sequel to someone else's film and, you know, put my own kind of spin on it. And it was something that, you know, they gave me the freedom as well to say that we want to do something quite dark and psychological. So, you know, I started thinking about films like The Shining and Possession. Yeah. So that was a fun one. And then I've got the Witches of Amityville. That should be coming out later this year, on sort of DVD and everything else.
Excellent.
And I've got another horror film called The Retreat, which is a little bit more of a personal project again. That's going to be with quite a new production company, up and coming. So hopefully sort of later this year, early next year, that's going to be filming.
Excellent.
And then I've found myself shifting slightly into action films now, which is, it's almost coming full circle back to sort of my original intention.
Yeah.
So I've just seen a few opportunities come up there. So I've got a film called Renegades, which is shooting, hopefully all being well, COVID permitting.
Yeah.
It's going to be shooting in September. And that's got a few recognizable faces in it. So Lee Majors is going to be in it. Yeah. Billy Murray, who, people know is like a sort of legendary sort of gangster figure in lots of films.
Yeah.
Possibly Danny Trejo, which would be really cool if he could come on board.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, and a few other people. And then I'm working on a few more films with the same company. So there's a film called Pretty Boy, which is like a biopic based on a renowned sort of gangster and fist fighter called Roy Shaw.
Right.
So that's going to be kind of in the vein of Bronson, the Tom Hardy film. That's the sort of benchmark we're aiming for with that one.
That's a good benchmark.
Yeah. And then I've got Backlash, which is going to be quite a big project with a bit of an action superstar in it, which will be filming hopefully early next year.
Ooh, sounds intriguing.
Yeah, so that will be sort of Yakuza in London, and then a bit of an action titan is going to be taking them on.
That's
with
awesome.
A few sort of recognisable British faces in there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's all kicking off at the moment. I found myself, I was getting to a point where I thought it was going to be going a bit quiet.
Yeah.
Because of lockdown and everything. But, I just sort of, because of networking and things like that, people sort of come to you, or you find people through mutual friends, and then, things happen, and it's just sort of kicked off quite quickly, really. So, I'm sort of working sort of almost back to back on sort of 4 or 5 projects at the moment.
That's pretty good going.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, for like 18 months, I've, barely stopped. It's a funny thing with film. There's a lot of films that, I wrote quite a while ago, which, because of the whole process, you write a film, 6 months later it shoots, and then, like 12 to 18 months later, then the release happens. So I'm almost catching up with myself now in terms of the releases.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just interesting to see them come out.
And we'll be back with Tom Jolliffe later in the show. And now it's time for this week's music section. This week we have a song from a band called Motel Transylvania. Motel Transylvania is a project born in late 2014 within Savannah's underground scene. After a few changes in the lineup, in 2016 the band established its final formation, composed of Toxie Ghoul on voice and drums, Tyson Gore on guitar, and Fish on double bass. Their sound is a combination of rough and unvarnished verses with melodic and direct choruses. The first EP, They Dig After Midnight, was released in 2015 by Archetype and Undead Artist Records. Over time, there has been a change in both style and lyrics content. From narrating simple, grotesque tales, the band moved to delivering concrete messages, real-life experiences, the will to party, and telling how the world can often be the scariest horror story. In 2018, Motel Transylvania released their self-titled album and started working on dates throughout Europe. This song is called Dead and Proud by Motel Transylvania. Enjoy.
Just cry, I cannot feel so cold. Like there is a true phantom. Another man has come to die. 6 feet up.
time for this week's short story. This week, we have a short story by Don Everett Smith Jr. called The Rookman of Roma Forest. Enjoy. The sun was about to set on Bartholomew Mullins. He decided earlier that day he was going to kill himself, and he would spend his final moments in this world watching the sunset in a deer stand that belonged to a friend. Barty, as he was known to his few friends, was huffing down a mountain path that had been marked out by rangers several years ago. On either side of it, ivy stretched and intertwined between the brown oak trees and the darker green pines of the Roma Forest, which was located in the heart of the Allegheny Range in the centre of Pennsylvania. With every step of his heavy boots, he huffed in concert. When he inhaled back, he could smell the earthy fragrances blowing from the trees. The Roma Creek burbled along the path. "Come on, Barfbag, keep moving," said the voice in his head. This was not his voice per se. Oh, it was his, but it was from the bitter part of him that had come to life in recent years. It was his perfectionism, realising its unrealistic standards would never be met, so it took on a life of its own and resembled the voice of his mother. When he was in school, because the first part of his name sounded like Barf, he was given the ignominious moniker Barfbag. And how he fucking hated it. But that part of him that truly despised himself continued to needle him with Barfbag. "You know Becca was elected to the town council and there's talk of him running for mayor," his mom said to him last time. It just added ammunition to the part of him that hated himself so much. "This is why you're Barfbag and not Mr. Mayor or Councilman Mullins." As the smell of the pines encroached, he was hoping to make it to the stand soon. Sweat was already trickling down his face as he stopped. A hand-drawn flyer stapled to a dead oak caught his attention. The drawing was of a monstrous man-like figure with the head of a crow. The arms were long and thin with 3 fingers on each hand, with a pointed nail at the end of each finger. "What the hell is this?" he said as a memory drifted across his brain. He read the headline beneath the drawing, "Beware of the Rookman." Barfbag, the Rookman is some weird Bigfoot thingy, he thought as another flyer caught his eye. It explained the phenomenon in a few paragraphs. The Rookman of Roma Forest has been a topic of discussion for decades. Some would say natives saw the monster years before European settlers arrived. Eyewitnesses to this beast claimed he stands over 7 feet tall, covered in grey skin like that of a lizard. It has been described as having long arms with 3 fingers and long pointed nails. But its most striking feature was that of its head. Eyewitnesses say it has the head of a large crow covered in grey feathers. It has 2 large eyes with 2 very large pupils that glowed red, and a beak that stretched out at least 4 inches. It is believed to be responsible for the deaths of several campers and hikers in the Roma Forest. "Movie prop or something," he mumbled to himself, remembering many independent horror films were filmed in the Roma Forest. "I bet Becca could have been an actor. You could not." Barty would say he was a decent-looking fellow, but middle-aged was adding to his gut and subtracting from his hairline. He reminded himself that when he was in his 30s, he could do this trail without skipping a beat, but in his mid-40s, the trail was becoming more challenging. It wouldn't be a challenge for Becca. Had you been working out every day since your 20s, you'd be able to make this trail without feeling like your stomach was going to heave up through your chest, Barfbag. And then he looked at his watch and cursed. And if you wouldn't get so distracted and had established the habits you needed back then, you also wouldn't be rushing. I swear, this is how you always handle— "Shut up!" he screamed as he stopped at a curtain of pine and maple trees. "You're not going to have to deal with this that much longer, and would you fucking stop calling me Barfbag already? That was 30 goddamn years ago." "I would stop, but remember, you're not the photographer who's made it into travel magazines or snapped pictures of rock bands for their album covers, you asshole." He pushed the voice away and then remembered why he was here. His death. Yesterday, Barty went to the Capaldi Hotel in Roma City. He had hoped to sell several photos of owls he had taken from a friend's deer blind. That deer blind. He figured he could get maybe $2,000 for his efforts. With that money, you won't have to eat canned pasta from the dollar outlet. You can eat at a diner and get the full burger meal, he said out loud. but the manager declined. "We're not interested," the manager said. "Good luck in all your future endeavours." Barty hung his head, and as he walked out, he passed the bar with a metal stand that said closed. He saw several bottles of wine coolers waiting to be put away. "Should I?" he said to himself. Several moments later, he briskly walked out of the Capaldi and reached into his bag and pulled out one of those wine coolers. "Now you're a thief, you chubby shitted bath bag. They owed me," he said out loud. "They did. The Capaldi was your last hope." "Yeah, it was," he answered back, and then he stopped. An image popped in his head, first of a rope tied in a noose. Then he saw the image of the Roma forest. "Do it. For real. Do it." "Really? Do it? Where else is there to go? You haven't had a newspaper photograph assignment. You have no money." He immediately thought of her. The girl with the wig. "Yeah," Barty said. "I'd see her." "You know where to go?" "I do," he said. Just 3 hours later, he was on the trail and he pulled out the second wine cooler and drank deeply and wiped the sweat from his face. He then manoeuvred his belt, trying to suck in his weight. The metal buckle poked into his stomach. Around his neck, he had his favourite camera and flash. He wasn't going to leave for eternity without them. "Hey, bath bag," he heard Becca say in his brain. He looked and imagined Becca standing there, barely breaking a sweat with his toned arms and legs and a game show host grin pointing. "Fuck you, Becca," he said, and threw a rock at the phantom that wasn't there. He looked down at himself and shook his head. All he could do was ignore the sweat stains that formed under his blue pullover t-shirt and jeans. His pants were a size bigger this year. He was still about half a mile from the deer stand, and he scratched his chin. Girl with the wig. Soon. "I know," he said to the continued voice in his head. Had he been toned like Becca, he wouldn't feel so tired, he realised, but he ignored it and stood up and pressed on through the gauntlet of pines and maples. Soon his steps matched the cadence of the flowing creek. The moon was beginning to rise when Barty finally made it to the deer blind. His friend Lewis kept the stand up during the season, which ended 3 weeks back. When Barty spent an evening in the deer stand taking photographs of the owls, he thought to himself, "I could stay here for the rest of my life." So he decided this was where he was going to spend the rest of his life, which was only another hour or two. He pulled himself up the 16-foot tall metal ladder with a clang clang. "If you were thinner, would it make that kind of noise?" He growled. He pushed back the camouflage-covered tarp and stepped into the space. The blind was easily 6 feet tall and 5 feet wide, with a floor that was made of several planks. The walls of the enclosure were hard plastic with an olive green colour and mesh windows. The wood creaked beneath him as the wind picked up, tossing the scents of sap and pine needles in his direction. The sounds of creatures climbing over twigs and fallen leaves announced their night shift was beginning. He sat down on the small metal stool that groaned under his frame. The tag on the bottom of the seat said it was able to hold up to 250 pounds, but by God's grace it held his 270 pounds. "I wonder if the Ruckman is out there," he laughed to himself as he spent the next few minutes downing the wine cooler. He touched the camera that hung round his neck, then looked out of the mesh window and watched as the last traces of the sun set to the western end of the forest. As he sat there, he kept pushing the name Becca to the back of his head, but it kept forcing itself forward. Becca Erickson. "Asshole," he mumbled as he drank. The drink's sweet and fruity taste washed down and relaxed him some. Mom liked him. She would also say you needed to be more like him. Becca was Barty's age, and he had a family that seemed to have it all. Every one of his kids was good looking, and his wife was beautiful, and it didn't help that this was the girl Barty had taken to the prom. Barty's wife left him 8 years ago, and he'd put on so much weight that he hadn't bothered getting back into the dating scene. The last time he saw Becca was about 4 years ago. Barty had a photography exhibition at the Roma City Gallery. He jokingly put up a jar that said tips. He'd invited Becca just to show him, "You ain't the only guy with it." Becca showed up and looked at a few of the images and walked out with a smile, a nod and a wink. At the end of the night, Barty noticed a folded piece of paper in the tip jar. When he unfolded it, he was surprised to see a check. It had been written by Becca to him for over $1,000. As Barty read the memo line, "You can use this bath bag here." His heart dropped. Where was Becca again? Bath bag. Running for mayor, he mumbled. Yep, I really honestly hate my life, he agreed. It really is not going to get any better for you, is it? Fuck it, he said out loud as he bent down to grab what was coiled up on the floorboards. A white rope made of nylon. Boy, Lewis is going to be upset when he sees what I do to this deer blind. The rope is your escape hatch. Yep. He reached down between his ankles and grabbed the rope in his hand. The image of the girl with the wig flashed in his brain again. Probably the only good thing I have ever done, he said to the air. An image of him as a Boy Scout holding up a fully knotted noose, winning a merit badge, jumped into his head. But then his mind jumped to Becca Erickson in his Eagle Scout uniform. He had been praised for raising $5,000 for the local senior citizens' home. Could you have done that? No. He began tying the rope faster, but looked down and saw the partial poster that said "Beware the Rookman." There was still enough light to see it, but he ignored it, stood up and pushed the olive green tarp door out of the way and stepped out. He eyed a branch several yards above him. This should hold me, he mumbled as he threw the loop end over the thick limb. It'll hold your fat ass. With a whoosh and a thrush, the noose dropped down directly in front of him. He took the other end of the rope and tied it to the blind's railing. This will do. He inhaled deeply through his nose as he placed the noose around his neck. He exhaled as he looked down. Barty pulled the noose tight around his neck and gacked, a throaty duck-like noise when the knot slid down. He took one last look at it all. He again remembered the girl with the wig. I hope she'll be there, he said. I'd like to say hello. He looked down at his feet and nodded. Into thy hands I commit my spirit, he said. Then he looked straight up into the sky and shouted, Fuck you, Becca! As the boards creaked beneath him, the camera smacked against his chest and he heard the leaves rustle in the wind. He took one last step, then swung into the air and into eternity. Bartholomew Mullins used to say, the camera called me at a young age. He was fascinated by the men who would run up to the famous and the newsworthy and snap their photos. He began to study photography books and imagined where the photographer stood when he took the photo. He would pantomime the angles, and his parents bought him an old 1974 Olympus OM1MD. He would take photos for hours and hours with it. This is what I want to do with my life, he would tell people. However, at some point, some well-meaning people told him, don't forget to get a real job. Photography is a tricky business. He did everything he could to fight for that dream, but some days the voices of degradation won. When that happened, his voices of lethargy and depression won. He would just spend the time taking apart the camera and other times looking at it. A more modern digital slapped against his chest as Barty's legs kicked like a swimmer. They were flailing for the normalcy of the ground, but touched nothing. As gravity brought him down, the knot should have knocked him unconscious. Instead, the rope was cutting off his air and he found the whole world around him exploded into sparks. The greens of the trees and the browns of the trunks blurred together in a grey shade. His ears exploded in a rush of sound that echoed around him. It was like two great thumbs were digging under his chin. He thought his tongue would eject from his neck. He made a garbled croaking noise and immediately his hands went up to the rope. His fingers managed to get in between the nylon and his neck as the lights continued to burst around him and a dark haze now began to fall on him. Oh shit, I'm dying, went through his head. Even the inner voice was panicking. His body swung away from the deer blind like the pendulum of a grandfather clock, but by some miracle it then swung back. His foot managed to tap the edge of the blind. God help me, he rasped out as he fell backwards and flew through the air again. The rope tightened around his fingers, but he held tight. He pivoted back to the blind, and the top of his hiking boots hooked the railing. He slowly pulled his frame to the blind and actually righted himself. Barty managed to loosen his noose with a loud cough, but the loop still hung from his neck. His stomach lurched as he was about to throw up over the side of the deer blind when he heard a loud ka-thunk above him. A hoarse, "What the fuck?" was all he could get out as something snapped overhead. He looked up and saw an immense shape squatting on the branch next to the white nylon rope, which was still draped over the limb and attached around his neck. The thing looked like a man, and its eyes glowed red and lit up the maple leaves around it. All of a sudden there was another crack, and the large limb broke free and fell to the ground. With a whoosh, the branch and the tangled rope rushed past him, and the force of the limb yanked him off the platform like an angry master pulling the leash and choker of a barking dog. He landed on a carpet of hard earth and dead leaves that crunched under him. My God, my back. He laid there for a moment. He moved his fingers and toes, but a stabbing pain indicated at least 3 cracked ribs, and with his damaged throat, his scream came out as a rasp. He groaned again as he opened his eyes and saw 2 large red orbs looking at him. Its head was cocked at an angle as if it was studying him. The creature opened its beak-like mouth and shrieked. Good God, it looks like a crow, he whispered. The monster opened its hand and 3 great fingers came down the side of the tree and gripped the bark of the tall maple. Its other hand reached past the first and grabbed the bark below. The creature's toes dug into the trees and it crawled down in a lizard-like fashion. It screeched as it descended. As it came closer, the creature made a small chirping sound. Then it began to coo like a dove. Barty looked at it, and it looked back at him. With another screech, the monster leapt from the tree and landed next to Barty, which caused his bladder to release. The warm fluid slid down his right leg. As the creature's tall frame stood over him, it looked down, then abruptly squatted and sniffed. Barty could smell the damp, earthy odour coming from it. Oh God, he thought as the pain racked his body. He was able to see the monster up close, and he noticed the sheen of its grey skin. Its skin had the same texture as a hairless cat. The skin was stretched across a thin yet tight muscular frame. The monster's head resembled a crow. Its beak would open and make odd high-pitched noises. It would sniff the air the way a canine would. However, instead of having feathers, it had ruffles of skin that made odd slapping noises as its head twitched like an actual crow. The eyes of the creature narrowed as it came closer to Barty's face. It sniffed him twice. Go away, Barty said in a hoarse whisper. The creature raised one of its fingers, and a black nail glistened in the rising moonlight. He heard 2 more loud sniffing noises as the monster tilted its head to the left, then to the right, and rubbed the nail across Barty's cheek. Oh God, he called again in a choked sob. The tears slid down the side of his face and head. The beast chirped as its black beak opened, and a tongue slowly uncurled from it and tasted his tears. Its tongue was bristly like a cat's, and its breath reeked like manure. The right side of Barty's face was wet with the creature's stinking saliva. It then looked at Barty and held up its left hand and pointed another of its clawed fingers. You know, bath bag, old buddy, Becca Erickson would never have been in this position. He would have figured a way out of this. Fuck you, Becca, he croaked again. The monster was startled backwards and shook its head to the left and the right as if to say, no, with a confused grunt. With a sob, he looked up at the Rookman, as he was now thinking of it, and whispered, just take me and be done with it. Its large eyes narrowed and glowed a hungry red as it hissed. Then with one quick thrust, it plunged 2 fingers of its left hand into Barty's stomach. He screamed. It was like someone had heated 2 fireplace pokers and stuck them in his gut. He howled in pain, and the monster's large eyes widened with expression. As his vision grew dark, he saw the monster leaning in with triumph. Dear God, he whispered as the creature pulled its fingers from inside his gut and it licked its fingers. The thing cocked its head again and pulled back its arm as both fingers once again pointed like 2 stilettos ready to be thrust deep within his abdomen. And all poor Barty could do was watch. This is the end, bath bag, he thought, no more. His brain began to play a quick slideshow of Becca Erickson's life, the life Barty had wanted. He saw 3 different newspaper article clippings about Becca. He saw Becca with at least 6 different girls at 6 different times, including the one he took to prom. He saw the new car his parents had bought him when he turned 17. He saw the full scholarship Becca was awarded on their high school graduation. Barty remembered hearing from his mother at different times when Becca was engaged, graduated and married. The creature pulled its arm back and it was ready to thrust forward, but then something very tiny shifted in Barty. It wasn't big. Somewhere in the darkness of his heart, somewhere in the depth of his blackened mood, Somewhere deep, deep down, a voice spoke to him. It was a still, small voice, like a breeze that gently touched his face. He had no idea where it came from, but he heard it in the back of his brain. It was a whisper. And he knew it wasn't his own, and he knew for goddamn sure it was not coming from that grey thing. The voice said one important word. Live. About 2 years ago, he was standing in the nearby Roma State Park taking pictures of the flowers. It was early in the day and the sun was not high in the noon sky yet, oppressing the park goers. He had been walking down a concrete path between two ball fields that were regularly used during the Little League season. Off the concrete path was a recently planted flower garden that had been donated by several community groups. Barty loved the colour scheme of reds, oranges and yellows and whites. He had only caught a glimpse of a silver-haired lady and the 2 kids she was with before she tapped him on the shoulder. Both of the kids had been playing on the swing set and were laughing and jumping and having a wonderful time. The older one was a boy of about 13, and he wore a blue baseball cap and jersey. The younger girl, who was around 9 years old, had long brown hair and wore a green short-sleeve shirt with the insignia of a green-themed cosmic hero Barty was quite familiar with. "Excuse me," the older woman had said, "I forgot my camera at home. Would you mind taking a picture of my grandchildren and me?" "Okay," he said, unable to come up with a decent reason to refuse. She and the children gathered together and he snapped a few photos. He stationed them in the order of height and snapped the pictures. Then he had the younger squat down while her brother squatted behind her and their grandmother squatted behind them. Barty snapped more pictures. He asked the grandmother to kneel down between them and wrapped her arms around their waists. He then took several more of those pictures. Afterwards, he showed the 3 images on the back of the camera. The 3 of them smiled and were quite pleased with the results. "Grandma, can we take a funny pic?" the little girl asked. The grandmother looked at Barty and he just shrugged. "Sure," he said as he lined them up again. Then with a smirk, he said, "On the count of 3, I want you to say doo-doo." The scatological reference got a laugh from the kids, and even Grandma smiled. She made a face and the older brother made antlers with his fingers and stuck his tongue out. The young girl grabbed the top of her hair and literally twisted it around so it covered the front of her face. "Holy shit," he blurted out before he caught himself. "Sorry." The girl, still wearing the wig over her face, pointed and laughed. "He said a bad word," she giggled as the grandma and older brother took a more serious air. "Sorry, her hair," Barty tried to say, but the grandma waved her off. "Watch this," and the girl pulled her hair off her head, and she was completely bald. "Oh," Barty said, "gotcha," and then forcing a smile, "Okay, let's go for the Sasquatch look." The young girl put the wig back on and raised her arms like a monster. "Grrr," she shouted, and Barty smiled as he snapped the photos. At the end of their impromptu photo session, Grandma gave him her email address. "If you could send these pictures here," she said, and of course he agreed. She leaned in and whispered a thank you. She then added quietly as the girl and brother played tag, "She's going to the Roma County Children's Hospital for an operation this Tuesday, and we wanted to have a fun day for her." Barty nodded without saying anything. Before he walked away, the grandmother kissed his cheek, and that made him smile. Later that night, he sat at his computer and put several hours' worth of work into the photos he took. He loaded the images into his favourite photography program and cleaned them up. He then uploaded the photos to a storage folder online and sent the grandmother the links. About 3 days later, Barty got an email saying, "Thank you so much for the images. Sadly, my granddaughter passed away on the operating table." He found the young girl's obituary online and the location of the viewing. When he walked into the funeral home, he saw the casket with the young girl, and she was wearing her wig of brown hair and wore a green dress similar in colour to the green superhero t-shirt she wore in the park. She had a peaceful look upon her face. To his surprise, the photos he had taken of the girl, the grandmother and her brother had been made into posters and sat on easels around the room. A photographer friend from New Jersey had once said, "Photography is just pressing the pause button on life." And there was the girl, forever young and full of life. The grandmother saw Barty and walked over to him and said, "Thank you. She looks so alive in these pictures. I'm so glad you were there. I know she is at peace now." Barty saw the heartbreak in the grandmother's eyes and wished he could have waved a magic wand and said to the girl with the wig, "Sweetie, live, live." For a moment he saw her there, standing in the forest and wearing her green dress. She wore the very sneakers he had seen her wearing that day. She was looking at him, he was looking at her. But before she disappeared, he heard her voice. "Live," the whisper said again, as a breeze crossed his face from the opposite direction. He blinked. She was gone. The monster pointed its fingers and thrusted its hand forward in one quick motion, ready to fork him. In reflex, Barty covered his chest with both hands, and his left hand felt something. The camera. "Please work," he said out loud, and he held the camera up and pointed it. He quickly pressed the button. With a whir pop, a burst of LED exploded from the camera like a flash of lightning. The night sky disappeared while the green of the leaves and the brown of the trees were illuminated into the brightest of day. Then, just as sudden, it disappeared, returning the blackest nights. The monster screamed in response. All Barty could see was a bright blue light in front of him. Come on, he said as the flash recharged. The monster lunged again and Barty flashed the camera. The light from the camera flashes like a firework and reflected off the beast's bulging eyes. The creature howled in pain and fell backwards. Barty was able to roll over and onto the ground. It felt like sandpaper rubbing the inside of his throat. He screamed with his aching ribs and his legs as they flared with pain. He then had an idea. His fingers danced across the menu on the back of the digital function, and he was able to put the camera into a test mode. He held it up quickly, pointed it and pressed it one more time. Whir, pop. The creature roared and echoed through one end of Barty's head to another. He just gritted his teeth and let the pain surf his brain in one slow wave. Barty squeezed again. Whir, pop. The creature this time stepped backwards and held up its arms to shield its eyes. Barty was able to brace himself with one knee on the ground as the monster rushed him. He flicked the button quickly, causing it to strobe. Whip-pop, 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 whip-pop. It was like a Gatling gun of light bursts, and the monster shrieked and then turned and leapt onto a nearby loblolly pine and climbed several meters straight up the narrow tree. Barty, still kneeling, stared up at it as it hissed at him. He felt the flash. It was very warm and he was afraid of overheating the bulb, but decided to risk it. "I'll say the same thing to you I said to Becca," came his hoarse screams. "Fuck you!" He pointed the flash one more time and pressed the button to strobe it. Whoop-pop, 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 whoop-pop. The monster raged as it ripped the bark from the tree and threw it to the ground. It then leapt to a nearby branch and pulled itself up. It found another branch and then another and swung away into the night. Barty felt a stir of hope, and for several heartbeats he looked and stared until he fell backwards onto an oak. His ribs exploded and his stomach burned from the wound. He allowed a sob and several moments of weeping. As he wept, he was waiting for the voice to call him bath bag, but it didn't. "You there?" he said with a sniffle. There was no answer. He looked down at the wound and smirked to himself. Apparently the layer of fat had protected him, and the voice couldn't retort about his weight or appearance. "You'll be smaller soon," he said to himself, and then to the voice inside himself he snarled, "You can stay away forever." The voice would say no more. He picked up his camera and kissed it, and dropped it to his chest and felt another item in his pocket. Found it and pulled it out. Though the screen was cracked, it still worked, and he dialed 911 and waited. "What's your emergency?" he heard a woman ask. "I fell from a deer blind," Barty said as his voice choked and fought another sob. "I'm afraid I'm going to die out here. I don't want to die. I want to live." "Okay, sir," she said. "We're going to get help out to you right now. What is your name?" No, he stammered. "Barty, sorry. My name is Bartholomew Mullins." "The photographer?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Sorry," she said. "I've seen your stuff and I really liked it." "Thanks," he said. After he gave an approximate location, or the whereabouts thereof, he sighed, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled. He was going to live. However, he looked over at the camera and picked it up and kissed it. It was time to rededicate his life to the camera, because it had saved his. Then a thought struck his mind. He began to look at the gallery folder on the camera, and to his surprise, the images were all there. "Holy shit," he said. He then stared up into the sky and was able to see the moon rise above the landscape. It was full and bright, and he would see it again tomorrow night. He smiled and whispered the name of the creature that was going to change his life, the Rookman Roma Forest. And Bartholomew Mullins had the proof it existed. And now it's time for the second part of our interview with screenwriter Tom Jolliffe. I mean, how long, when you're doing a commission, sort of what are your sort of deadlines like?
I've had sort of, I normally get a phone call from, like there's couple of companies I've worked with now quite a few times. Champ Dog Films and Proportion.
Yeah.
And they have really fast turnarounds, and I don't know how they do it, but they just manage to do it. And they're sort of perfecting the skill of doing it on these budgets and quick turnarounds.
Yeah.
But I have had, times when they'll say, we've got this idea that we want. Do you think you could write it? And I'll say, yeah. Do you think you could do it in 2 weeks? And it's like, well, yeah, probably. So, yeah, it can be a tight turnaround.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And then, even then, sometimes, it'll say, well, we need it in 2 weeks. And then, as things happen with films, sometimes they get delayed a little bit, and then it's not for another 2 or 3 months that they film anyway. But I quite like writing quickly anyway.
Yeah.
I think sometimes if I like an idea, and, most of these ideas, particularly the really low budget ones, it's just been the concept that's attracted me. So then, I think, yeah, I can do that. I know how to do that kind of film. And then I can just launch straight into it and do it quite quickly.
Yeah. I think that's the beauty of screenwriting. It is a much quicker process than writing a novel. I know that from personal experiences. Screenplays, I think the longest a screenplay's taken me is about 2 months. And that was not working on it full time. Whereas the novel generally takes about 6.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's with a screenplay, you're limited to that. Well, I tend to find with the genres I'm doing, I'm limited to sort of that roughly 90-page kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, you might have to do 3 or 4 drafts, but I think in the end, there's been scripts that I've gone through like 3 or 4 drafts, like one horror film that I'm doing called The Retreat, which I mentioned before. That's gone through like sort of 3 or 4 drafts, and this sort of middle drafts, it was sort of going away from where I wanted it to be and where the producers wanted it to be as well.
Yeah.
So, it came back around in the latest draft, which was good, but it's that, that perfecting.
Yeah.
And that sort of, that process really, in the end, hopefully makes a better film.
Yes. Talking about quick turnarounds on these films, do you know, is it Andrew Jones of North Bank Entertainment in Wales?
Yeah, I've heard of Andrew Jones. Yeah.
7 days. He shoots his films in 7 days. Each film doesn't take longer than a week. So how do you do that?
I've got no idea. I mean, this is the same with the guys at Proportion. They do that in sort of, they've been known to do sort of 7 days as well.
Yeah.
It's amazing, really, because also if the guys like them, they've been doing it maybe not so long now, maybe sort of 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
But there's a gradual progression where you can see the films are getting better and better. I think, in part because they know what they can do, they know where they can push it a bit more, and they're just getting into the swing of that process, and they tend to work with people again and again. And so they know, they they could dive in, feet first, and they know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of these independent production companies now, it reminds me a lot of like the old Hammer days, where Hammer were doing stuff back to back with the same casts, and shooting 2 films in the same location at the same time with the same casts, and just this incredible thing that sort of then went away after the end of the studio system, but it seems to be coming back again now with the independent production companies.
I think it is, yeah, and I think it's nice to see as well, because there was a bit of a lull in sort of British independent film, really. Sort of at the turn of the century, up until about sort of 5-10 years ago, and I think you're seeing a lot more of these little companies now.
Yeah,
I think because things like cameras are becoming more affordable.
That's right.
And it's good to see that these guys are flying the flag now, because in LA and places like that, people are always constantly making films. But we're sort of doing that now with guys like Andrew Jones and the guys at Champ Dog and Proportion.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they're sort of they're flying the flag for the Brits.
Definitely.
Which is good, really, because I think there's a big market there, and it still tends to be aimed predominantly towards the American markets. But we're getting in on that, and we're making films pushed at the international, mostly American markets.
Yeah.
But I think, there seems to be a few more companies just sort of rising up now and, working consistently and just making films. And they're doing it because they love making it.
Yeah. And it can only be a good thing.
Yeah. I think, the audiences are still there. So it's like anything, your next film is based on, how your current film does.
That's
and they've managed to sort of, they've managed to work sort of consistently 5 years, just, doing 5-6 films a year.
Yeah. And
I think, people sort of, people do like to criticize a lot, but they sort of underestimate the passion that's involved in doing that, and, a lot of the skill.
That's right.
To be able to do that.
And what I think is great is if you look back at the sort of greats of the 80s in Hollywood, they'd all come out of the 70s independent movement anyway. So
exactly, yeah.
We could be harboring the next generation of greats. So
I'd like to think so. Yeah. Not toot my own horn there, but it'd be good. Everyone has to sort of start somewhere. And, I've just sort of found that I've had a little jump at the moment from my horror budgets to sort of the kind of budgets that I'm working with on the action side of things.
Yeah.
And, a few other sort of promising things here and there. So if you sort of keep working hard and while the momentum's there, if you keep pushing it, you will sort of head upwards.
Yeah, that's it.
And it's good to see, because I've been working with sort of Champ Dog and Proportion for sort of a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And I can see that their budgets are getting slightly bigger in some cases as well. But they're not sort of forgetting to do those, the micro budget films as well.
Yeah.
So they're still doing their bread and butter, and they're getting these opportunities to do slightly bigger films.
That's great.
Yeah, it's just, while you've got the momentum, you just keep pushing it and doing it.
Yeah. So have you got an idea stored away in the back of your mind for that day where you've got the really big budget?
I don't think I have, really. I think I've got so used to writing with a lower budget in mind, just because of just trying to be proactive, really. When I was starting out, I sort of thought, well, if I aim at this kind of budget level, eventually I could sort of move up a little bit.
Yeah.
I think the problem is, at the moment, I've not really got an interest in writing, so like a Marvel film.
No.
But there's been this sort of thing where you've got the independent films which are shot for maybe, I don't know, like $1 million.
Yeah.
And then you've got the $300 million film from Marvel, and you haven't got much in between the sort of indie films and the tentpole films. I think it's starting to come back a little bit more now, and I think you'll see that more now because after this, I think people are going to have to reevaluate how they make films.
Definitely.
So I think guys like Blumhouse, they make films that are sort of Jason Blum never really oversteps what he needs to.
No.
So they tend to cost $5-6 million. And he does it on those budgets, and they make a good amount of money.
Yeah, it's a very good business
makes
model.
A few more. Yeah. So I think we'll see a lot more of that. I think the success of films like John Wick show that you can make sort of action films without having to spend over $100 million.
Yeah.
As well, and still have a lot of spectacle and be spectacular. Because I think, there's been a lot of, for every sort of massively successful Disney and Marvel film, there's like maybe two, massive budget films that completely bomb.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And they're eating up all the money. So there's not enough filtering down to the sort of, the indie filmmakers to do genre films. And, it can be very difficult finding funding for your films as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I think, if people keep, the low budget films keep getting a level of success and, we see that kind of Blue model being used a bit more, hopefully that will change the landscape a little bit.
It'd be nice.
Yeah. And then you might see a little bit more money, not being put into all these, massive budget films, half of which there isn't actually that much of an audience for. And, just filtering it down to sort of simpler ideas, because I don't think you need to have, 3 hours of wall-to-wall CGI.
No.
And, to entertain an audience. I think you can do something like The Invisible Man, which was whatever the budget was, 7 million or something like that it was. And it did really well.
Yeah, especially considering it didn't even get a cinematic release.
Yeah, I think it just got in before, and then it had the video on demand on top when they did it on pay-per-view. So yeah, I think they've done really well, and I think it's going to open a few more doors, hopefully.
I think so, and I think that's another thing about the horror genre is it's always the thing that starts off an indie wave.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's like the A24 films, A24. So they've got this really indie mentality, art house kind of thing going.
Yeah.
But on genre films as well. So it's that's quite an interesting little mix.
It is
to sort of have those, that with horror.
Yeah.
And I think that's being successful as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good horror coming out in that vein. Ari Aster's films and forgotten the other guy's name. The guy who did The Witch.
Robert Eggers. Yeah,
Robert Eggers.
Yeah.
Some really good
I'd
stuff
love to do something like the Lighthouse, actually.
Yeah.
I'd like to do something that kind of weird.
Yeah, it is wonderfully weird, isn't it?
Yeah. Because I think, that's a very kind of strong idea. And, you can tell that he's not really compromised on his vision there.
Yeah.
And I think that really shows. And I think it's one of those films that's going to grow in time as well.
Definitely.
And it'll get a lot of appreciation.
Definitely. I mean, I was blown away by that film, but a lot of people don't get it.
I can see why they don't get it. I appreciate that, but I think it was probably for those reasons that I loved it. I think probably was my favourite film of that kind of season of end of last year.
What I always find is that people who don't get it worry too much about getting it rather than accepting the fact you're not actually supposed to get it. It's what you make of it.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it's one of those films, like all the sort of the best horrors, where if you watch it again, you pick up new things.
Yeah.
And I also think Willem Dafoe was robbed of an Oscar. He should have.
Yeah, it's a fantastic performance.
Nominated, yeah. I thought he was brilliant. So yeah, I'd like to do something like that where I've just got complete carte blanche to do whatever I want.
Absolutely.
And just be as unashamedly weird as I could probably be.
Yeah, I think we'd all love to do that.
Yeah, I think some of the films I enjoy the most are some of the most divisive. So yeah, I think that's an interesting quality to have in a film.
Yeah, I get that as well. I really like divisive films. Right, I have these 3 questions that I always ask every guest. So, what is next for Tom Jolliffe?
I think just loads more films. And then next year, I'll probably be producing a few as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've got a few more personal projects I've been developing for a few years, one of which is a horror kind of in like the vein of The Hills Have Eyes.
Excellent.
So that is probably my big budget idea. It's not going to be big budget, but bigger than a few of the other ones I've been doing recently in terms of horror. And then another sort of drama film,
right?
Which I'll be developing as well. So I'll be doing those, and then hopefully a few more commissions as well.
Excellent.
Busy man. Working, non-stop. I keep thinking I want a holiday, but then, if I have 2 weeks where there's nothing sort of new, I start getting a bit itchy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I can understand that. What is your favourite horror movie of all time?
Oh, that's difficult. Just off the top of my head, first thing that comes to mind, probably because it's just had its 40-year anniversary, probably The Shining.
Yep, good choice.
It's just, again, it was one of those films that was really divisive when it first came out, and then it's just got that really unique quality.
Yeah.
All it has to do is that opening when the music kicks in. That's enough. That gets me going.
Yeah, it's a brilliant opening.
And then it's one of those films where you've got a complete master like Kubrick who's shooting the film.
Yeah.
And just that, it looks amazing. Great performances all round. Brilliant.
Yeah, I love that film. I love the book as well, and a lot of people who like the book don't like the film because they're so different. But I just view them as two different entities, really.
Exactly, yeah. I think, The Shining is very much something that only Stanley Kubrick could have made.
Yeah.
And he never sort of compromises what he wants to make. Because he did the same with 2001 as well, to an extent. I think a lot of people who liked the original book for that didn't particularly like the film.
Yeah.
But yeah, he had his own way, and that's why his films are all kind of timeless.
That's right, and he worked in so many different genres. That's what always impresses me. He could bring that skill to anything.
Yeah, I mean, there's not all that many directors that could have been so diverse in their career.
No.
So, yeah, there was a lot of skill in that. And then, everything he does is so meticulous as well. And you can see that in the way he shoots everything.
Absolutely. And the final question. We also have true horror sections on this show. Have you ever had a spooky experience yourself?
I was with an ex once, and I just sort of woke up in the middle of the night, and she was sitting up in bed.
Yeah.
So I sort of thought, oh, what are you doing? Get back into bed or something. I tried to sort of, pull her back down because she was just sort of sitting up. And as I did, I looked down and she was lying next to me. I looked up again and the person there was gone. And so we told her dad that. And apparently this was the room that her late mother used to sleep in sometimes. Ooh. So that was a bit, that was a bit weird.
Bit spooky.
That's probably the only time I've had a real sort of encounter.
Yeah. Ooh, creepy. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Tom. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm really looking forward to your future projects.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
And now I'm going to do a little quick review of a film that I watched the other night called President's Day. President's Day is a low-budget horror film that continues that great tradition of horror films centred on holidays. Although, let's face it, all of the good holidays have already gone. Halloween, April Fool's Day, Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, even Christmas. They've all been done, so now it's time for filmmakers to look to some of the lesser-known holidays. The filmmaker in this case is named David Zuckerman. Prior to this movie, he had directed a handful of shorts and a revenge drama called The Vigilante. President's Day is actually more of a comedy than an out-and-out horror. In it, 7 friends decide to spend the President's Day weekend in a relative's cabin in the woods. I mean, of course it's a cabin in the woods. It's always a cabin in the woods. Ever since The Evil Dead, it has always been a cabin in the woods. I mean, there was even a film. What was it called again? Cabin in the Woods, back in 2011. Not unlike that film, Cabin in the Woods, this film is a spoof on the horror genre. However, it's neither as funny or as scary as Joss Whedon's classic. However, that film had some things that this film didn't. It had a very decent budget and a cast of excellent actors like Chris Hemsworth, Sigourney Weaver, to name just 2. President's Day, though, does have some things going for it. It does have a great sense of fun and a lot of charm. It turns its weakness into its strengths by making its most horrific moments some of its best jokes to cover up budgetary problems. The characters in President's Day tend to fall into the typical genre stereotypes. So, for example, we have Lily, played by Monica Ricketts. She's the level-headed one, the smart girl. Clearly from the opening scene, this is our final girl. We have Clarence, played by Dax Hill. He's the sensitive, artistic one. In fact, in the first scene after the prologue, Clarence is behind the camera, filming Lily. This brief scene sets it up as though it's going to be a found footage movie. However, the camera runs out of battery and we cut to traditional film. Lily jokes about how annoying and ridiculous it would have been for him to film everything that weekend. Perhaps that's a little jab at found footage movies, I don't know. Next up we meet Brett, played by Judd Zumwalt. Brett is a cross between a high school movie jock and a stoner surfer dude. In the first few minutes of the film, his overacting and his voice will drive you insane to the point where you're going to think, I'm going to have to turn this off. However, as the film progresses, Brett gets some of the best jokes and lines in the movie. There's Ruttiger, played by Benjamin Goodwin. He's a fully fledged nerd in the 80s movie sense, not the current comic book geek chic kind of way. Ruttiger has been paid by Brett to go with them and write an essay to stop him failing history. Then we have Ashley, played by Brittany Faith Rozoff. Ashley is Brett's girlfriend. She's highly sexualized and the, shall we say, stereotypical horror movie slut character. In fact, there's a brilliant scene towards the end where Ashley is running through the forest, and first her shirt gets torn off by a low-hanging branch, so she's just running around in her bra and trousers, and then amazingly the trousers get ripped off as well, and even she comments on how ridiculous that is and that it doesn't make any sense. So that's quite a funny scene. We have Max, who is played by Chelsea Taylor-Leach. Max is Brett's goth twin sister, who is there to be miserable and mysterious. And director David Zuckerman plays the character Jake. Jake is the cool, angsty, motorcycle riding, leather jacket wearing stud of the movie. But of course, as this film is a spoof, we later find out that many of these characters are quite different from the stereotypes we think at first. For example, Ruttiger, the cowardly nerd, is actually one of the bravest of the group. Brett, the wild man, dude bro, surfer dude, is gay and is in love with Ruttiger. Jake actually has crippling anxiety and is an absolute coward and has just created this persona of the cool guy to cover it. Anyway, through the actions of the teens in the cabin, they raise all of the dead presidents from the grave, who intend to kill them all for no really logically sound reason. However, the film does address the fact that this is completely illogical and just says, well, go with it. The film contains some genuinely funny comedy moments and some ridiculous gore moments. The presidents themselves are full of rivalry, puns and menace. The film is self-aware enough to know how offensive its central idea of beloved presidents like Lincoln, Washington, JFK and both Roosevelts killing random teens is. In fact, it kind of makes it a running joke. This is not a Hollywood movie by any stretch of the imagination. This film has a very low budget. Presidents from various different timelines are, for the most part, just wearing black suits and white shirts. The costume isn't brilliant. The makeup effects aren't brilliant. But it is a very funny film and very entertaining. And if you get the chance, I highly recommend that you all go and watch it. And now it's time for this week's true horror story. This week's story comes from Reddit user SlanderINC and is called The Scariest Night of My Life. This is a long post, so stay with me. Allow me to set the stage for this. I was 19 at the time this took place. I was a Marine and I was on my first deployment to Afghanistan. Not too far from my platoon's patrol base, 3 to 6 kilometres or so, was this structure that looked like a castle. Through interpreted conversations with locals, we were able to determine that they believed that it was built by Alexander the Great. Whether that was true or not, I will never know, but let me tell you, this place looked ancient. So, being Marines, we did the only thing we thought was prudent at the time. We went out on patrol with the intent of setting up an OP outside this structure. We took our Afghan border police with us. When we got close to the structure and our Afghans figured out what we were up to, they refused to go any further. Before they left, they kept repeating the same word over and over. Don't ask me to remember what it is because this was a decade ago and there is no way I can remember that. But what I do know now is they were trying to warn us of evil spirits. We went in anyway without our Afghans, with the intent of staying there overnight. This place was basically an ancient fort with mud, clay, brick walls on 4 sides with a building in the middle. So we set security, made sure we had the comm checks with our patrol base, and they had an updated position report on us so they knew where we were in case we got into trouble. darkness fell. Not too long after that, I went up to take my turn on the wall with my friend, watch for anyone that might be trying to sneak up on us, and any other Taliban-related shenanigans. Not 20 minutes into our shift was when the weird shit started going down. The entire time I was on the wall, I felt watched from all sides. I turned to see a figure walking along the wall not far from where we were sitting. I say walking, but it was a robed figure that almost looked to be floating. I turned to my friend to see if he saw it too, and he said he did, but when he got his night vision back on, it was his turn to rest. The figure was gone. We didn't see anything else after that for the rest of our shift. We uneasily finished and went to rest, where I ended up dozing off at some point. I don't know what happened next, but I awoke to a completely black figure literally squatting on my chest. When I went to yell for help, nothing came out, and it felt like I had a hand over my mouth. I reached for my knife. I was a machine gunner and couldn't just grab my machine gun, and I felt like something was pinning my arm to the ground. I tried to squirm free but couldn't move, so I bit down as hard as I could on what felt like a hand on my mouth. At this point, whatever weight was on me instantly disappeared and I could move and talk again. At this point, I was freaking out, and my brothers who were around me saw me. My training had kicked in and I was trying my best to keep quiet and not pass out because I was hyperventilating. My squad mates calmed me down, and after telling them what had happened, they all admitted to having the creeps and the feeling of being watched the whole time we were there. None of us could sleep, and we all basically sat back to back for the rest of the night when we weren't on watch. We were pretty freaked out, and so every noise and rustle of the wind made it even worse in the total silence of that ancient fort in the ancient desert. If you haven't experienced the silence of an open desert in a part of the world where there is absolutely zero light and noise pollution, then I suppose it can be hard to appreciate how any noise in a place like that in the middle of the night in total darkness, when you're already alert to sounds of the enemy and now on even higher alert from something you can't understand, is just about the scariest thing anyone can ever experience. I will never experience that kind of fear again in my life, ever. To finish quickly, as soon as the sun came up, we left. Everyone was scared shitless and none of us spoke about it again to each other. We never went back to that area again, and I still suffer nightmares and sleep paralysis because of my personal experiences that night. The scariest part of this whole thing is that I know it's probably just in my head. And now it's time for this week's horror movie news. First up, we have the news about the latest horror movie hype on Netflix. It seems that at least twice a year, we have a film come onto Netflix that is making viewers throw up or lose sleep or have panic attacks. And I'm pretty sure these stories mostly originate somewhere in Netflix's marketing department, because those films that they talk about like this are the only things that anyone can talk about online for a few weeks. However, though often very good films like Veronica, they rarely live up to the hype. Well, this week we have the news that the latest horror film added to Netflix, a movie called Our House, is leaving audiences feeling fucked up and losing sleep. The film originally came out in 2018, and it's one that I've seen. I enjoyed the film at the time of watching it, but it was nothing that blew me away. The story revolves around a young physicist whose education is cut short when his parents die, and he gives up his research to go and look after his younger sister. However, he continues his work in his garage at home, and he builds a machine that ends up attracting evil spirits into the house. Not intentionally. That's not what it's meant to do. I think it's some sort of way of transferring energy wirelessly or something. Electricity wirelessly. I think that's what it is. It's been a while since I saw it. People are claiming now, who watch it on Netflix, that they are unable to sleep after watching the film and feeling shell-shocked. Honestly, it's an okay film, but it's not pants-worryingly scary or anything. So I think this is just another Netflix hype marketing strategy. Next up, we have the news that things may be starting to return to normal in the world of film, as the crew of new Spanish horror movie Vampus Horror Tales have returned to the set after a 2-month shutdown due to the coronavirus. COVID-19 has halted production of countless films around the world, from major blockbusters to smaller independent productions. The ban on filming in Spain, which was one of the countries hit worst by the coronavirus in Europe, lasted 2 months. Felix Gomez, the lead actor in the film, said it was another sign that life was returning to how it was. He said, "It's so nice to recover the feeling of normality that we had before, after being locked up for almost 80 days. So hopefully, more horror films will be going back into production in the very near future." And finally this week, we have the news that Elizabeth Moss is taking the lead in an upcoming horror movie called Run, Rabbit, Run. The film is directed by Dana Reed, who directed episodes of TV shows such as The Outsider, Space Force, and Moss's own regular TV gig, The Handmaid's Tale. The film is described as a ghost horror thriller with a script from novelist Hannah Kent that follows a fertility doctor named Sarah, played by Moss. Sarah has an understanding of the cycle of life, but when her young daughter Mia starts displaying increasingly strange behaviour, Sarah is forced to challenge her own beliefs and confront a ghost from her past. This is another horror movie for Moss, who recently took the lead in Lee Wannell's update of The Invisible Man, as well as having a supporting role in Jordan Peele's Us. So she's doing a lot of horror at the moment. Is she trying to become a scream queen? She's a very good actress, though. Thank you very much for joining me for episode 6 of Everything Fear. If you've enjoyed the show, could you please tell all of your friends about it and possibly leave a review for us? It would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. All that's left now is to tell you what's coming up next week. Next week, we have an interview with 2 young filmmakers, Nathan Cox and Archie Meyer, who have made what is possibly the greatest horror movie short I've ever seen during lockdown. We'll also have more music, another short story, and of course, all our regular features such as true horror, horror movie news, and spooky news. Until then, stay scared.